No easy wins, only tough decisions. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Mortals Book Reviews. I'm your host here, Kyron, live on the 22nd of January 2025. And as you might surmise, this is the podcast which reveals why Cancer is the greatest zodiac sign of all time. No, it's actually Pisces, which is what I am. But no, we're not going to be talking about zodiac signs today, but we will be talking about Cancer. We have this book here, The Emperor of All Maladies, a biography of Cancer by Siddhartha Mukherjee. So this book was published in 2010. It's 470 pages in length in terms of the actual writing, and then there's probably another 100-ish pages of index and notes and etc. things that you usually find in medical books or things that reference a lot, even history books. This probably took me 15 hours of reading, and the reason for this is there's no charts in here, and it is dense, boy. It is just thick in terms of the writing on the page and the size of the writing. Man, it took me a while to really get through this book. So it's a history of cancer throughout the centuries, but particularly the 20th century. So it really does focus in the kind of periods from the 1900s to the 2000s. And it details breakthroughs in prevention, cure, chemotherapy, surgery, genetics, knowledge, understanding of what cancer is. And it's told from an American POV, American point of view. So we do get a lot of statistics and stories from America, even though it is a worldwide disease. And he does touch upon researchers in other countries, for example, who made breakthroughs, or people, England in the, earlier centuries in the 19th, where they were first doing surgeries, and, the vaudeville type era where there was this surgeries and like it was almost in a stadium type thing, so students could be looking down upon it, things like that. So he has this personal touch that runs throughout the books of his interactions with himself, with students, with patients, with scientists who discovered, the next step forward, and notable activists pushing for change. Hence why this book is a biography, even though it's not a biography of a person. So it's a history, but he kind of treats cancer as if it has some human-like qualities. And you'll find the writing in this book is not only scientific, it does have these relatable touches to actual people and things like this. So let's jump into the themes and questions that come from this book. And one of the things that came up was, what's required to treat a patient well? And for me, I would have said it was probably, 95% knowledge, understanding of your craft. And in particular, we're talking about cancer here. So if you had gallbladder cancer, 95% of it would be how to treat gallbladder cancer, the knowledge of how that works, drugs, surgery, all these sorts of things, risk profiles of people, and then maybe 5% of listening to the actual patient or who it is. Now, I think that previous assumption I had has switched a lot, and the theme that I really got about this was this medical knowledge part of that, the 95%. And can you actually really know that much about cancer? How much of a surety can you have that your doctor is up to date with the knowledge? Is the knowledge even good? So let's jump into, I suppose, what we learned throughout this book. So starting across, from the very beginning, across time, the state of the art evolves. Knowledge is built upon previous knowledge. So the first knowledge of cancer was basically acceptance of futility. And so we have a couple of references to the hieroglyphics and the parchments that some Egyptians were writing on. Some of the earliest Greek people were talking about this, hence karkinos, which is cancer in Greek, and hence the little crab, which is on the front of this book here. And so that was the kind of originators, and it was very much just like, if you have these kind of symptoms, like a big lump in the side here, you're screwed. Like, there's nothing that can be done for you. When we get into, I suppose, dare I say, more scientific age, where people are coming up with more theories of this black bile, and there's these 4 biles, and the black one is what produces cancer. So we're starting to see, okay, there's maybe some explanations for why these certain things are happening in people's bodies. In particular, I haven't particularly defined cancer here. He goes into it into the book, but it's essentially unlimited growth of cells replicating. And now cells are meant to replicate, but it's when it hits this kind of unlimited exponential stage without any of the tendency of other genes to say, hey, put the limit on here, anti-tumor causing genes and things like this, and those are deactivated or things like this. So yeah, cancer's complicated. There's very many different types when it comes to, leukemia, ones that affect the lungs, ones that are prostate. There's basically, you can get cancer in every type and situation in your body. So he mostly focuses, I suppose, on leukemia and metastatic cancer just as a general, which is where the cancer spreads throughout your body to other areas, and breast cancer. I'd say those were the kind of main ones that were gone over in this book. I don't even remember or recall a single instance of him talking about brain cancer, for example. So he's talking about these sorts of things. Now, we start to get into past those rudimentary treatments, or actually, those were just rudimentary ideas, knowledge, philosophies, theories of what cancer is. And we get to these rudimentary attempts at ailing these. And so this is where we're starting to see surgery, for example, where people are actually, surgeons are cutting into the body and trying to remove these tumors and things like this. And that was probably, I would say, more in the kind of 17th, 18th century. In the 19th century is where we start to see that, okay, maybe we can treat this chemically as well, and that there is perhaps some options of treating these people. And we're also getting to these questions of like the efficacy of this. And of course, before this, there was also the witch doctor type, eat the root of this certain plant and it will cure this mysterious lump illness, this sort of thing. And we begin to question, like, okay, is this actually helping people, and is this what is actually being done? Can we know this scientifically? And studies are attempted, and they are kind of like initially, okay, this is really good, and yeah, but then there might be some like questions of the efficacy and things like this. Double-blind studies start to become more common, and we start to see like, okay, like a lot of the things that people are prescribing here aren't actually helping. And so we see this a rise of, initially, I guess it was futility, nothing can be done. Then we get to the stage of like, okay, yeah, we can do some surgeries. We've got some basic forms of medicine, perhaps chemotherapy as well, starting to enter the picture. And so time frames, we're talking the 1800s, early 1900s here. So there's some hope. Then we get into the study era where we're actually studying what efficacy do these drugs have, and mastectomies and mammography. So, screening for breast cancer and things like this. And the stats aren't very good. So we start seeing, okay, this need for caution from doctors arising, and from even palliative care becoming a viable kind of option to not treat people, but to at least make the end of their lives better, rather than just continual hope of and putting in these really toxic chemicals into the body. Because chemotherapy, they're essentially just toxic chemicals that are going into the body to target, you would hope, specific cells that are replicating in an unhelpful manner, in a cancer manner. But there is certainly a lot of side effects and damage that is also done to other parts of the body. So we see this caution arising, but then eventually we start to see, okay, the science, the medicine gets even better. Chemotherapy in targeted certain ways of special types of drugs on special types of cancer arising, and we're kind of having breakthroughs, I guess, but there's still this kind of caution that was being there. and people are starting to demand drugs. Hey, I need this thing. I want this thing. And this is combined with rising cancer rates of certain things. And as humans are living longer, cancer becomes a large, greater killer of people in comparison to other types of things like polio, smallpox, and stuff like that. And they're living longer lifespans, and so cancer tends to develop more in older people. So we start to see that it's killing more people. And we have this kind of demand come back to where this activism occurs. And this is particularly, I would say, from the 1950s to the 2000s, especially prominent in the AIDS era, where a very similar phenomena occurred where people were demanding drugs. They're like, I'm going to die in 3 months' time. I don't give a shit about if this has, an FDA approval of 98% efficacy or whatever. Just give me the drug. I'm willing to take the risk. I know it might not save me, but I need something. And so we see a very similar phenomena occur in certain types of cancer where people are like, just give me the drug. I don't care about the study. I don't care about the stats. Just give me this. I'm willing to try anything. So we see this real swinging back and forth over the ages of, yes, we can cure this, or we can help prevent this, or we can remediate this, to, okay, perhaps we're going too far, perhaps we're actually not helping people and making things worse. And this tide goes over. So funnily enough, I actually believe the best person to treat someone is yourself in a certain way. So knowledge, this particular knowledge, or perhaps not, a better way of saying that is a very important part of the decision making of how to treat someone is yourself. And so a dose of skepticism by the lay public with regards to what you're being told is actually pretty healthy, I think, because the medical advice that some of these people were talking about in this book is batshit crazy. And it's batshit crazy in hindsight, but I think also you could say in the moment, there was certainly people questioning, other doctors questioning certain types of common knowledge. This is how you treat something. So, for example, radical mastectomies were a very common phenomena in the, I'm going to say the early 1900s. And so, for those who don't know, a mastectomy is where you're cutting into the breast to remove breast cancer, and in particular a tumor. Now, what some doctors were doing, a lot of doctors were doing, and the prominent person behind this theory was that you need to, his name was Halsted. I've forgotten his first name. There's a lot of names in this book. Halsted was saying, we need to cut in as deep as possible, remove all lingering traces of the cancer, and this is the way to treat these people. They'll go into remission more. They'll be able to live longer lives. Sure, we're kind of disfiguring them in some cases, but in most of the cases, but we're saving their life. And so what these radical mastectomies would do, so even if the cancer was just in the fleshy part of the breast, he would be cutting down into underneath the arm to remove the lymph node. He would be cutting even into parts of the collarbone to get out any lingering traces of cancer there. And so what it would do to a lot of women was just ruin their bodies. He's literally just removing parts of their bodies. And so they would end up with these hunched in shoulders, severe, think of all the crazy pain that you'll receive from that afterwards by having a hunched in back and things like this. So we can see in hindsight, radical mastectomies, bad idea, and it didn't even particularly help. It might have saved a couple of people, but on average, radical mastectomies were not helpful. We can also see, don't get me started on bloodletting and putting doses of radium into the breast to kill the cancer, which it did kill the cancer, and then also develop cancer in other parts of the body because you've literally got radioactive elements in your body. So what can you kind of take away from this? Well, knowing your own body, incentives for why a doctor might recommend or not recommend something, the poor outcomes for chronic illness treatment versus the fantastic outcomes of immediate life-threatening emergency treatment. So there's plenty of like kind of just general knowledge things that you can come into, where if even today, I believe if you're talking to a doctor, not taking their word as gospel, because we see they have the knowledge of averages of the scientific data of how a certain treatment will affect a certain person on average, but you are a very individual case. You know your body a lot better than they do, and so I think working with them is probably the best way. And if something is off and they're recommending radical mastectomies and you're unsure about that, or just, this is such a tricky topic, so tricky. And this applies to the researchers as well. So a lot of this book is about the researchers who are trying to create breakthroughs to find ways to treat people with cancer. And there's, once again, prominent figures throughout the decades. I'm not going to be able to list them all. And once again, this is very focused on the American side of things. So it's, he doesn't talk about the pioneering cancer person in Germany, for example, or Australia, because it's an American book. He's focusing on them. So what we kind of see, for example, is that a lot of scientists, they need to trust in themselves rather than the prevailing general theory of how a cancer spreads or how it reacts or how it develops, of trusting in their observations, of deductive reasoning. Okay, this drug affects this type of cancer. This type of cancer is related to this gene, or this gene has similarities with this one, but it's slightly different. So another drug which is similar, perhaps could cause this reaction, etc., etc. And even just some faith in taking some action of actually doing something to a trial, to if you've got a theory, like just working on it, and despite the pushback, just going forward with it. So they had to trust the data because of the long lag effect of with data, even data can be so tricky, because one of the things that causes cancer is smoking. We know this now. In the 1950s, this was not known. This was very much up for debate. And one of the things that happened was essentially a lot of soldiers went to war. In war, you need stimulants to get through the tough times. So a lot of soldiers would start smoking. They brought back this habit after war, World War II in particular, but World War I as well. And this proliferated throughout the society as general, because smoking is a very social habit, and this is probably the main benefit from it, is of having social connections with people. This spread throughout, not just from young male soldiers, but to the elderly, and then eventually to women. And we see, huge pickup of the smoking rates over time. We start to see questions of, okay, there are a lot of lung cancers developing, like what's causing this? But people weren't sure because, one, it takes a long time for it to develop. So smoking was already in society, so it wasn't just an easiest cause and effect, because it is taking place over like 2 decades, 3 decades. And then there was obfuscation by the actual tobacco companies themselves. Check out the book review I did of Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes and someone else, I can't remember his name. Shocking. And this book also talks about this as well, of the disgusting behavior of tobacco companies in hiding data. And this is one of those cases where you have to as a scientist and a researcher, trust in yourself and take faith. Like, honestly, we're talking about science and data, but taking faith in a theory of testing petri dishes thousands of times, getting thousands of negative results, all in the hope that you will make that one-off discovery of a penicillin type nature. And yeah, it's so crazy just to see, finding that the right key to bind the right protein to a right specific cell, or things like this. It's crazy the amount of nuances that goes into the research as well. So knowledge is hard to trust. What can you do? Well, the key across history of cancer seems to be finding it early, whilst it's local and yet to spread. This is true of basically every illness, I imagine. And are there any ways where it would be better to let it develop? Perhaps only if it's growing, and it's better to let it develop a bit, so it's easier to actually cut it out if you're getting surgery. But basically, no, you want to find it as soon as possible. And this is one of the sad things about cancer. It's a very, very slow, hard thing to treat. And that's because it can also adapt to drugs. So we're always kind of fighting a losing battle. I actually really feel for doctors and companies whilst reading this, and patients, obviously. It's terrible to have cancer, to get it. They get lambasted for being too cautious when people are dying and willing to try anything. So they're like, okay, well, we'll give you the drug. They don't actually say that. It's actually a lot more complicated. They'll still put the reins on, but eventually they'll start putting a drug out, or trying a new trial, for example, of a radical chemotherapy, where they would just dose patients long after the initial results were positive, but they were really just trying to eradicate it to its utmost degree to get all signs of cancer gone, and even continuing it after all signs of cancer are gone. And then people are like, you're killing people. You're unnecessarily dosing them with toxic shit. You're going to kill them. So it's like, what the fuck, man? How do you treat this thing? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And desperate people and grief-stricken people will absolutely lash out. This is life and death we're talking about here, the most important kind of thing that a person can go through. So, are you willing to cause extra suffering in the hope for a cure? We see many instances of doctors having to make that decision and trialing this and seeing that, yes, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And, how is the patient, and even indeed, how's the doctor really to know if they're going overboard with the treatment? We have to trust in we don't have to trust. Trusting in the scientific data is generally a smart thing to do if the studies are well conducted and over the long period of time. But a one-off individual result, or even individual results, will not necessarily be a great thing. And we see, for example, a South African doctor who had these great breakthroughs and was doing all these fantastic things. When people actually went and looked at his data, he made it all up. It was just complete bullshit. So, big takeaway. Okay, cancer as a whole. It has been a slow, excruciating attrition war. Breakthroughs that happen make a difference for sure, but usually they are highly specific individual types of cancer. And we can kind of see in some of the graphs that are on the screen now that over the decades, the mortality rate will maybe drop from 20 to 10% for certain types of cancers, brain and nervous system here. We had a big drop with lung, trachea, and bronchus, and that was pretty much just because people stopped smoking. All other types of cancers, the mortality rate, it's also complicated by that people live longer, and so, are you measuring the deaths per population, which will rise, or are you measuring life extension span after treatment, or are you measuring quality of life hours after this? There's so many different ways you could measure this. So the things that do help is pretty much prevention. Prevention is better than a cure. So no smoking. People, get your pap smears for the women out there. For the men over 45 or 45 and over, get those colonoscopies. Don't avoid searching for it, because your best chance of surviving is finding it early. Curing cancer is likely not going to happen anytime soon. People have been talking about this for centuries. The cure is around the corner in the hopes that there will be a polio vaccine type thing to cure people of this. From what I gained from this book, that's unlikely to happen. One, because cancer is very tricky in that you can use drugs on it, and it will adapt to those drugs. It will find a way of evolving with you. And look, viruses can do this as well. So that's not to say that there can't be a vaccine perhaps one day that will do something. But I think it's likely only to come from a super smart, flexible drug creation industry that also is very alert to finding cancer and abnormal growths in the body very quickly. So you need a huge industry to be able to create the specific drugs to specific people and cases, and also widespread technology of finding cancer very early in the body. And man, that's going to take a long time to happen. Long time to happen. So yeah, all the gains that have been made have been on very rare cancers, which were amenable to a certain type of drug or a better way of doing surgery. But there hasn't been that much in terms of like we're close to curing it, or we're winning the battle. You're winning the battle, but goddamn, there are a lot of casualties along the way. Very, very sadly enough. So let's jump onto the author, some extra details. Siddhartha Mukherjee, born in India in 1970. He studied medicine in the US before going down the kind of crazy PhD master's sort of path in subjects that I have no chance of pronouncing, so I'm not going to even try. He's written some other books on genetics as well, but this was kind of like the big dog, the prominent book, this being the Emperor of All Maladies. And the wording you'll find within is rather evocative, as kind of indicated by a biography. So he'll talk about, ruthless, inexorable, what a word, persistence in dose after dose after dose when he's talking about treatments, the heartbreak of treating a patient, of young kids, especially with cancer, distraught parents unable to do anything, of the feelings of being on a cancer ward, of the researchers in their dungeons, of the ostracism of people researching sort of things. Like when you're lingering around death, it's not particularly a nice place to be. The personal touch in this book is what made me feel the most in terms of really getting a sense of what cancer is. And for example, during the Victorian era of surgery, he was talking about just cutting people open, and I was just on my bed reading, had my shirt off, and I looked down at my abs, and I'm just like, God damn, I'm so flimsy. Like, this flesh body is so, you think of getting into a car accident, and it's just like, yeah, limbs can go off, brains smushed, all that sort of thing. And then it's even more horrifying when you think like, I can be attacked within my own body, can be killing me. And that's a lot of what he doesn't go too much into, the psychology of either the trying to cure it for doctors, or the psychology of patients. But very, very hard to take in when your own body is what is killing you. Yeah, terrifying. Kudos to the people who can hack being in the medical industry. It's given me a bit more appreciation of the toughness of the damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of things they have to face. Frontline workers in a job, and when I say frontline workers, in this case, I'm talking about the surgeons, the nurses, the researchers, those sorts of things. Perhaps researchers aren't frontline. In a way, they are. Being able to tolerate the suffering of small children day in, day out, of being in a hospital, I personally would find intolerable. The minor amount of time I spent in hospital with my mum this last year was not fun at all, and man, kudos to them. So the crazy thing would even be the bureaucracy of trying to treat people, and if you're very fixated that this is the way to treat someone, this new drug is going to work, we've seen good test results, and then being held up by bureaucracy of the government, of your own hospital, of your own colleagues, that would drive me batshit insane. I felt that bureaucracy just in working in a mine site, and that was only related to coal productivity and efficiency. So Lord knows what it'd be like when it's life and death on the line. Summary: you'll learn a lot from reading this, and I got a great idea of how terrifying cancer is, but also gratitude that if you have it now, or as is likely to happen in your lifetime to develop it, because I think it affects kind of 1 in 2 people over a certain age, you're certainly got to be glad that you're born in this time rather than 20 years ago, rather than 40 years ago, rather than 100 years ago, and certainly rather than 2,000 years ago. So thankfully it is moving forward. The knowledge, science, medical interventions do help, and we are getting better. It's just a very, very slow pace, and making inroads into this cruel disease is very, very hard, and it's not breakthroughs, and there are breakthroughs, but they are small steps on the long path to hopefully one day curing it. I did get a bit bored in some sections of this book, to be honest, because it's he'll get a little bit too deep into the genetics, into the actual mechanisms of the replication of this is ARC blah blah blah, this is ALS and so there were some sections where I'm like reading it, my eyes getting a bit crossed, like, oh geez, and it is 470 pages, so there were quite a few sections of that, so it's not exactly fun reading. I'd put this in the kind of camp of informative to just the right amount. I don't think I needed much more in terms of the science and the actual knowledge of how the genes work and things like this. And I certainly did enjoy more the personal aspects of the book. So overall, I'm giving it a 6.5 out of 10, The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee. It's a decent book, and if you want to learn about cancer, I haven't read many books on cancer, if none before. So this is a decent starting place, I would say. In terms of similar books recommendations, probably the most similar book I've read is The Noonday Demon by Andrew Solomon, which is on all about depression. Very, very similar style and length of the book. Has the personal touch whilst also talking about the history of it and the kind of up-to-date medicine, or where we roughly are. This book doesn't talk much about treatments in 2010 because it's more the history of it, which is probably more of what I appreciated. If it was a book just on, what's the latest of cancer news in 2010, I would have been bored out of my mind. And also knowing from this book, the latest and greatest in cancer treatments in 2010 is probably ridiculously out of date 15 years later here in 2025. So yeah, there we go. Richard Rhodes making the atomic bomb, also, not related to cancer, but I think style-wise probably is very similar. Okay, value for value. This is a value for value podcast. I do all of this upfront, free, anytime, available for anyone, anywhere. And there's never going to be ads nor sponsorships on this. So I just ask that for any value that you get from this, you just return it in kind. And there's multiple ways of doing this: time, talent, and treasure. Time, sharing this with someone, of telling them about the book review channel, of even going to check out any of the other Mere Mortals podcasts, because there are quite a few that we put out, both as audio and video versions. Talent, give me some book recommendations. What's a book that you enjoy that you think I might enjoy as well, or your thoughts on this book if you have read it? I'd love to hear all of those things. Write it in a comment or reach out via any of the social media links down below. And then finally, treasure. There's a PayPal link down below if you want to send through some money to help support the show for all the costs that it has for hosting these things, buying new equipment. Hopefully one day, actually not hopefully not one day treating any cancer that I develop, but an extra couple of bucks would certainly go well towards that. Where I am live here, I've got a couple of people in there. Michael Nelson's says opinions on VRIL. I actually have no idea what VRIL is, so you might have to elaborate on that, Michael. I'll quickly look this up while I'm addressing the other comment, which is Cole McCormick. And he says, cancer is wild, and he would know because unfortunately his father passed away. When was it? It was in August, or was it July, Cole? So about 6 months ago. And he got the upfront experience, which is very, very sad. This book was The Power of the Coming Race. What the hell is the coming race? There's something about master race. Okay, I'm not sure this is related to cancer, mate. So I don't know. I thought this might be it's a fictitious secret society that is said to have existed in Germany in the early to mid 20th century. Never heard of it, mate. That's actually a new one for me. So no opinions on Vril. I am live here, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday, as always. So would love for you to come join in with me. And what's coming up in the future. Next week, I'll be doing my translation episode on The Alchemist and O Alquimista. So I'll be giving you some thoughts on translations. I have just finished reading I haven't just finished reading. I am almost finished reading The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. I am reading The Blue Ocean Strategy by, I don't know those people's names yet, but that has one of the wildest things I've ever seen in a book before, and not in a good way. So get prepared for that one. What else have I got? Yeah, those are the main ones that come to mind for the moment. So plenty of stuff coming up in the future. Juan will also be dropping an episode here and there. And I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining in. And I really do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Ciao for now. Kyron out. Bye.